Hello and welcome to this great investors edition of Wealth Track. I'm Consuelo Mack. The Chinese place great stock in fortune telling. In the same way that Western business executives turn to management consultants, the Chinese and other Asian executives rely on fortune tellers to advise them on business and investment decisions. Well, having fortune telling skills is not a prerequisite for becoming a great investor, but it is one of the hallmarks of this week's guests, experienced Asian hand Mark Headley. Headley, the chairman of the board of Matthews International Capital Management, was able to see the future some 20 years ago when he was involved in the first SEC-registered Asia ex-Japan mutual fund. Back then, Mark saw the future that was Asia in the four emerging tigers, Hong Kong, South Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan, and in the so-called Tiger Cub economies of Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines, and Indonesia. In a recent interview, I asked Mark Headley why the recent financial crisis was so different for Asia than the last big crisis was in the late 1990s.
Well, it was a very, very lonely place, being a long-term Asian bull and believing in the future of China and telling people that Korea really could reform itself and turn around. And the U.S. market was really just going into technology ecstasy at that point. And as we all live through this current global crisis, it is a relief that Asia is something of the innocent victim, although I don't think anybody's innocent in the world, but it's not about Asia. And when you see the young analysts and some of the portfolio managers just getting depressed about the returns in the market, you remind them, it's not about us. You know, this Asia is being hit hard. The losses are real. The corporate results are down. There's a lot of stress out there. But really, Asia is fundamentally intact in this crisis, and in many ways it has an opportunity to move forward, at least in the perception of the global investment community, which I think is happening. As
American investors, individual investors, where do you think the best opportunities are? And I know you're a bottoms-up manager,
sure,
so you invest in individual stocks.
Well, off the top of my head, I would say single countries in Asia. Obviously, some of them have grown very significant, and Japan always being a big economy, China having grown tremendously in the last few years to be in a very large market opportunity. But they're more like owning a single stock for an American investor. I mean, unless you've traveled there, done business there, which many people have, but unless you have some real affinity and knowledge of the place, I think you're better off in a diversified fund. And to be perfectly honest, while I love and continue to love the Matthews Pacific Tiger Fund, which is sort of a core diversified Asia ex-Japan fund, I would say if I were talking to the broad American public, I would say there's sort of there's a barbell. Right now, if you're 20, 30 years old and you can put a little money into something, a small cap Asian fund, I think this is a great opportunity. The small cap indexes in Asia had fallen 50% before this bear market really got going. So and they're bouncing back strongly now, but they really got annihilated. People got terrified in the early days of this bear market and pulled out. The first thing they sell is that little company in Singapore or Korea or anywhere else, and they got annihilated. And yet at the same time, those smaller companies is so often where the exciting growth opportunities are, where the entrepreneurial Asian spirit is really coming across. And so I'm very excited about that. And if you're 50 or 60 and you're trying to get foreign exposure, odds are a small cap fund or even a core tiger fund like mine is too volatile. It involves a lot of risk. And so, the dividend-based strategies, the more absolute-based strategies, I think are a great way for people with shorter time horizons to get exposure to Asia. You may not have the upside, but you should have less risk.
What's the most important thing that Americans should understand about in investing in Asia, or the potential of Asian investments?
I have always looked, and I think it probably comes a bit from growing up in California and that whole sense of Western migration. Asia is a frontier. And it's an opportunity. And when I look at really bright young Californians learning some Mandarin and wanting to get involved in Asia, I think that's brilliant. I think it's a lot like those young East Coast people who said, I'm going to go to California and start something, whether it was 50 years ago or 150 years ago. I think that you really have to look at Asia as an opportunity. This is a place that needs American expertise. It needs American creativity. It wants the lifestyle that we have. And it's an opportunity. And whether as an investor, going through a mutual fund, or as a business saying, hey, is there some way we can tie up and get involved in Asia? I really think that the future of the West Coast in the United States is going to be very much based on being part of a Pacific economy. And, we all look to China, but there's a lot of economies out there that we can tie together across the oceans. And so from my point of view, it's more positive than negative. Yes, it's competition. Yes, we don't really make many T-shirts here in the United States anymore, but the future should be about selling so many of the very, very high-quality things that we have, providing the services that we do so well, and being really committed to always moving ahead on those. There's tremendous energy in Asia. We have the talent to help that energy move forward, and I think if you see it as a partnership and not a competition, you'll be successful.